Welcome to yet another episode of the Great Legal Mind Show. This is Aman Abbas. Today I have with me Mr. Sanjay Hegde, who is a senior advocate with the Supreme Court of India. And besides being a great lawyer, he is also a big advocate of civil rights. He doesn't shy away from calling spade a spade, and he has been a part of several extremely important matters, which we will be talking about as we move along. He is also an expert on constitution. Mr. Hegde, very warm welcome to the Great Legal Mind Show.
Thank you, Aman, for having me.
Since we've spoken about the constitution, I think let's go back to that time when the Constitution Committee was formed, and it was all being written. With what spirit the committee was formed, and if you could actually take us through a bit of that history, that will be extremely important in today's context.
See, the Constituent Assembly, when it was elected, was not elected on a universal basis. It had a lot of very fine minds, but the future of the country at that point of time was uncertain. The Constituent Assembly also had people who were elected from areas which then went to Pakistan. And among them was Dr. Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar had been elected from a constituency which went to East Pakistan. And he had been elected there by the votes of the Namashudras of Bengal, whose leader Jogendranath Mandal went on to become the first law minister of Pakistan. So the first few months of the assembly, they just marked time. They did not know what the future held. And when Dr. Ambedkar's seat went off to Pakistan, he was not a member of the assembly
anymore.
To bring him on board, it was Gandhiji, whom he hated, who suggested to the Congress that now is the time to get him on board. So they reached out, they got him elected through Bombay, and then they made him the chairman of the drafting committee. Now you must also appreciate the times that the Constitution was written. Why was it written in that manner? Why did we have rights for everyone, specific rights for minorities, fundamental rights which could be enforced? It was because the Constitution was written against a backdrop of very great violence in the previous decade. You had the World War, you had the Jewish Holocaust, you had partition violence, you had the murder of the Mahatma. All these things come together, and you have the founding fathers saying, look, let's not go down that violent path anymore. Let's look for compromises. And it was, I think there's an Israeli author called Hannah Lerner, if I'm not mistaken,
right?
Yes. Who wrote a book called Constitutions for Deeply Divided Societies. And she says that these were crafted compromises. So yes, the first great compromise was when Gandhiji reached out to Ambedkar. And Ambedkar and a lot of other people, including Bengal Shivarao, you had D.P. Khathan, you had Muhammad Sadullah from Assam. Everybody was there trying to draft something of a monument that would endure. And thankfully, despite all our amendments and all that, the Constitution is still intact and the basic structure is intact.
Yeah. So basically, the committee had actually representation from every kind of
the assembly. The Constituent Assembly consisted of a great divergence in types of men and women who were members. There were people who were elected, people who sought election, who sought to come on the assembly, but there were also people who were persuaded to come on. So one of the people who was sort of brought in from Madras was a fellow from my hometown of my home district of South Canara. It was Father Jerome D'Souza. He was a Jesuit priest, and he was teaching in Madras. And Rajaji brought him over.
Right. Yeah. So, and in fact, that was the time when actually, it was ensured that everyone actually comes together to form the constitution, which is going to become the backbone of the democracy that we live in today. And I wanted to actually ask you today that, do we actually have our fundamentals rights intact? Looking at, several developments that we see, how much intact are they? Let me ask you that very conceptual, very basic question.
Do we have constitutional rights in the pristine form that was envisaged? Maybe not. But equally, there have been rights which have been deepened. But what really strikes my mind, especially over the past few years, is that now there is a deepening engagement with the Constitution. And the concept that we have rights, that rights are inherent in men, that is what has spread all over society. Now, I couldn't, just let me give you two different examples from two different ages from the same area. In the early years of the Constitution, that was the time that a college called the MGM College in Udupi, to which I went, my parents went, was formed. My mother couldn't join the college immediately because there was no provision for separate loos and libraries and this and that, and the Madras University refused to give recognition. At that point of time, a writ petition being filed in the Madras High Court and people like Justice Subbarao writing a judgment was a very huge thing. So that's an old judgment called Shantabai versus University of Madras, and it's the leading judgment on ius dim generis. Now cut to the present day, when little girls in that same area were denied education or access to education, they said, no, we have a constitutional right. I'm speaking of the hijab case.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. But see, the question here is that, the right to follow your religion is basically a fundamental right, and that includes a whole lot of things, including hijab, and hijab is just one example. There are so many other things as well. I'm asking purely from legal viewpoint and not political viewpoint, that why would a court even entertain something like that?
Well, the words are there in the Constitution that you have a right to profess, practice, and propagate religion. Now, each of those words has a significance. Now, what is the practice of religion? For a Hindu, doing a puja or cremating the dead, these are all part of the religion, as it were. There are certain portions which may not be necessarily rooted in religion, but can be part of the religion's culture.
Absolutely.
So, in the early years of the Constitution is when this phrase of essential religious practice came in. There was a mutt, again in my hometown of Udupi. A mutt is a religious institution now, and it was taken over by the government of Madras, saying that this is being misadministered. They said, you are interfering with my religion. To which the Supreme Court said, look, everything that's concerned with a religious institution is not necessarily religious. There are many facets while you practice a religion which are secular in nature. Say you need food for a langar, right. You need oil for the lamps. How you purchase it, and if you start making profits out of it, then you can't say I'm practicing my religion and I have a right. So therefore, the Supreme Court said only that which is essential religious practice, that's what we will protect. So now then comes the question, what is so essential?
Exactly.
If you look at it, almost you can be a Sikh without having long hair. Yeah. You can be a Muslim and still possibly enjoy a drink.
Absolutely.
So how are you to decide essential religious practice? And this is where recently Justice Chandrachud, the current Chief Justice, in the Sabrimala case said that we end up having to decide what is essentially religious or what is essential to a religion. So these are two different questions actually. And you end up sometimes making the judges Maulanas or Dharm Shastris.
Yeah, so I think there'll be a lot of then interpretations that are going to happen when these things will be challenged in the court, and I think we are living in the interesting times. Now let me just come to another one, which is, and my question is that how much power the state has to do the interpretations of these fundamental rights. Like for example, from freedom of speech viewpoint, there's one who gets arrested without even saying anything or before even getting into the show, and then there are a lot of calls for genocide and whatnot, and there's no action at all around that. How does actually law view these things? Like can there be suo motos on some of those things? Can you know you know and another question is that when the state agencies actually pick up people, it takes time for courts to react and it takes its own course, and then a lot of damage is already done. So how does law view all these things?
Now, there is, of course, the ideal position in law. That is what is there in the textbooks. But the practice of courtroom law is entirely different. And often you have to check as to what will run with the judges, what will not run with the judges. Again, let me give you two separate instances altogether. When I had just joined the Supreme Court. It was about 91, 92. And this lawyer called Shabnam Lone had been picked up. I saw Mr. K.K. Venugopal come straight into the Chief Justice's court, and it was a constitution bench which was hearing some other matter regarding tax, and told the Chief Justice, look, my junior has been picked up and we don't know, etc. Please summon the government, ask them what has happened. And they sent for the Attorney General, who I then worked with, Mr. G. Ramaswamy. And thereafter, they directed her to be produced before the Patiala House Court. And she was produced there. Bail was sought for by Mr. Arun Jaitley, who appeared for her. And within a few days, she was out. On the other hand, in recent times, I have seen, this was 92 probably.
Okay.
In recent times, I have seen Mr. P. Chidambaram in court being informed that, the Delhi High Court had rejected his anticipatory bail. His lawyers tried to mention, because there was a constitution bench already sitting, they went to the next judge, and the judge wasn't very sure that whether he could entertain the petition or not. And because that petition could not be entertained at that point of time, it ended up with Mr. Chidambaram going to jail and then getting regular bail through the entire process. Took a very long time. So if it could happen to somebody of the stature of Mr. Chidambaram, there is a cautionary lesson for all of us as to where exactly our civil rights are and how much they will be protected.
Okay, well, you've said so many things without even saying those things, and I think for viewers to kind of use their own discretion, what to talk, what not to talk. It's a very thin line now.
And there's a little couplet from who was that, Firak Gorakhpuri, who said, अब अक्सर छुप छुप से रहे हैं, बस यूं ही कभी लब खोले हैं, पहले फिराक को देखा होता, अब बहुत कम बोले हैं.
I think it actually sums up this entire discussion today. Now, okay, let me ask you one last question. So how do we as citizens protect our fundamental rights? What are the things that we should be aware of? What are the things that people should do to be able to protect their fundamental rights?
See, one is you say that they are aware. Yes, they are much more aware than they were in a previous generation. I also take great pride in the fact that now a lot of good young people have come into the legal profession. People who would otherwise earlier go on to becoming lawyers and being engineers and doctors have come into the various law schools. They have come out into practice. Some of them have become judges, and some of the older ones who went to the earlier law schools are now becoming judges of the high courts. So I do think there is a deepening engagement with the Constitution across the board. But you cannot depend only on that. And ultimately, what is the Constitution? The Constitution is what the people and the polity decide it will be. Long ago, in 1944, Justice Learned Hand of the US had gave a famous speech called "The Spirit of Liberty," where he said that that he sometimes wondered whether people did not put too much trust in the Constitution and the courts. He said, "Liberty lies in the hearts of men and women, and when it dies there, no court, no Constitution can do much to save it." So the first thing is that the spirit of liberty has to be protected, not only for yourself, but also for your fellow citizen.
Absolutely. I think the whole concept of, tolerance, though I am not very a big fan of that word, um, but I think the whole concept of tolerance actually comes into the picture, which actually, looks at that spirit for yourself and for your fellow citizens. So thank you so much, Mr. Hegde, for your time today.
Thank
And
you.
it was a good conversation. And I am very sure that a lot of viewers are going to learn from it. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Aman.
Thank you. That was Mr. Hegde on the Great Legal Mind Show.